Well, welcome everybody. My name is David Murphy, and I am the 2020 chapter president of NAIOP Central Florida. As you know, NAIOP represents owner advocacy, relationship building, and thought leadership. And we're very excited today to have Dr. Fishkind speak to us about our current economic situation and what now. I'd like to first thank our annual sponsors. Our platinum annual partners are Baker Hostetler, CBRE, Hurt Construction, Greenberg Traurig, Iberia Bank, and Witham. Our golden annual partners, again, we really appreciate all the partnership that we have here at NAIOP Central Florida, particularly during a challenging time such as this, which hopefully Dr. Fishkind will have some positive news for us, but we really appreciate everybody's involvement with the chapter. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our silver annual partners. Some upcoming events that we're planning. If you're not a NAIOP member, we'd encourage you to join our journey and become a member. We are one of the fastest growing NAIOP chapters in the nation, and please feel free to reach out to either Lindsay Winter or myself to learn more about joining our organization. We have a couple of upcoming events in September. September 9th is our Project Spotlight, the Julian Apartments. The Julian Apartments is located in the heart of Creative Village. You can have a tour and a panel discussion. The panelists include Tim Baker of Baker Barrios, Jim Ellsperman of Brassfield and Gorey, and Craig Usler of Usler Development Group. And then September 15th, we have a up-close event with our Ready Orlando and OUC Charge It. It's an event in partnership with BOMA, City of Orlando, Orange County, and the City of Winter Park. Folks, we have a lot to go over today. So at this point, I'm going to hand off to Trevor.
Thank you, David. I want to thank our primary sponsor, HSBC, a new sponsor for NAIOP. We really welcome their involvement. And thanks Dan Burns at Tavistock for helping to procure their support. And also my company, Colliers International, where I've been for over 20 years. Great place to work. To get started here today, I brought my bullshit detector here and deflector. There's so much noise out there. All of us seem to spend hours deleting emails, dealing with social media and all the other data sources. I get Zoom fatigue at times. I'm sure I'm not alone. It is an efficient way to communicate though. But with this seminar, Hank and I hope to give you some clear signals. So I won't need this. And some real good direction about this year and going forward. Got to start out with a question about the unique nature and downstream economic impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic effect. It seems to hit especially hard on families whose members are employed in the service sector, where there have been and are widespread economic disparities. So Hank, we'd love to hear about the highly differential economic effects that you see starting in January of this year, then February through July, now and moving ahead.
Sure, Trevor, and thank you everybody for joining. Let me show you a few pictures because nothing's more boring than an economist just speaking, but I think a few pictures really help. This is a very unique recession. This is the first recession we've ever had that's been a good sector recession, and therefore it has certain consequences. It is going to be the shortest recession we've ever had. It's also one of the sharpest, and as Trevor said, it has magnified impacts on the services sector, creating a really two-track kind of situation here, and it accelerates many of the structural changes that were already underway. In terms of the forecast trajectories, baseline case, assuming that we remain at a high plateau for infections that don't rise further, we get another CARES package, we get a vaccine in 2021. The economy cannot recover until we have a vaccine. We're running at a half to three-quarter speed. We'll continue to do that. The red trajectory is the base, the blue trajectory is the baseline. If we get additional infections and we don't have any additional support for the economy, and the vaccine is delayed, then you get the red trajectory, which is, talk about dismal science, this is really ugly. And why do you care about GDP? None of us sell any GDP. The reason we focus on GDP as economists is because there's a very high correlation between the trajectory for the Florida economy in red or the Orlando economy in red and US GDP in blue. And the correlations are very high. So that's why we care about GDP and focus a bit upon it. And finally, to get directly to Trevor's question about the differential impacts upon different kinds of industries, this is the impact year-over-year job creation in Central Florida caused by the recession. And it's leisure and hospitality. Many of the other sectors are very limited effect, and construction's actually positive year-over-year. If you look at the unemployment rates, you can see the highest unemployment rates in Florida are all in the Central Florida tourism sector. So it is a highly differentiated event. Trevor?
Yeah, let's talk about retailing briefly. I think we've all observed the widely differential impacts of this pandemic. Boat and RV sales have been soaring, while many small shops and other businesses have been closing. Let's recall the retail industry was under severe stress due to the Amazon effect and other disruptive factors in January of this year. So please discuss, if you would please, I also wanted to quote John Crossman, a friend of mine who I respect. He thinks that retailing needs to return to the 80s, the 1880s, which I think is a really provocative thought. But share with us, if you would please, Hank, and discuss retailing data given these severe headwinds.
Sure.
Perhaps point to some opportunities.
Sure. Just a few things. I mean, I think it's fair to say that what this COVID-19 recession does and did is to accelerate changes already underway. We had already seen a great impact from e-commerce of all types, particularly as it affected big box stores. But this has been going on for a while. And here's some estimates that we use in our practice in terms of the amount of retail space that can be supported by an individual for neighborhood, which is a grocery anchored center, community, which is your power center or Home Depot, that kind of thing, and a mall is a mall. It used to be 50 square feet a person. And then by 2000, that had shrunk, especially given the impact of e-commerce on community and malls. And this post-COVID-19 is really driving it down. Not so much of an impact on neighborhood grocery yet, but accelerated impacts on things that were already happening. And these mobility data tell us a lot. This is from Google, and activity levels are still 24% below baseline. So even as things may reopen, if customers don't feel safe, they're not going to shop. So to Trevor's point, it is back to the 1880s. It's about service, it's about the experience, and then there's going to be a huge excess supply of this space available for reuse and in need of substantial reuse, and we're going to need some substantial regulatory reform to spur that reuse. Trevor?
Yeah, let's talk about interest rates a little bit and community development districts. We are experiencing historically low interest rates. The federal 10-year treasury is at 70 basis points, I think, or thereabouts. Hank, you're involved in many of the community development districts, of which there are 600 such quasi-governmental entities here in the state of Florida. I look at Apopka, for example, where there's a failed DRI that really benefit, I think, in the Kelly Park interchange area from a CDD. So if you would, please discuss these CDD bonds, the ad valorem assessments that back those bonds, low rates in general, and the demand that you mentioned to me about fixed rate CDD bond debt. Sure,
Trevor. Let me start with the history and outlook for interest rates. As Trevor said, in blue is the 10-year bond rate, red is the federal funds rate, the 30-year mortgage is in this gray, and mortgages are in the green. As Trevor said, the 10-year bond rate is at near historic lows. The federal funds rate, which is the only rate on this chart the Federal Reserve actually directly controls, the Fed has said they're going to keep the rates low for a long time, so certainly through the end of this forecast horizon. 10-year will stay very low also, and we're at very low mortgage rates. Ironically, given this two-track economy, these very low mortgage rates are actually spurring some residential activity, and we'll get back to that a little later. But this is the outlook for rates. Still should stay low throughout this forecast period. And that then gives rise to something very interesting. The money's cheap, but you can't have any. I mean, it's always the same case with the banks, isn't it? So this is the Fed survey, just to show you some data about how many banks have tightened credit for, here's commercial and industrial loans, but it's the same thing whether we looked at almost any kind of loans. 71% have tightened their standards. So although the rates are very low, it's very hard to get any money from the banks, especially for A&D in this market environment. The non-bank sources are better, but somewhat surprising to me is there's been very strong demand for our community development district paper. Initially, in March and April, we had some dislocation in the financial markets, and the markets all but froze up. And it was very scary. It reminded us of 2008. But the Fed stepped in, the markets have stabilized, and there is strong demand for high yield paper. And these community development districts issue high yield tax exempt paper. And so it has experienced very strong demand over the last 60 days. And we've been able to bring numerous deals to market that have been oversubscribed, but with people demanding the paper. So there is very strong demand right now for it, and we expect that to continue throughout the course of this cycle. Right now, rates for community development districts are ranging between 3.5% for the strong existing districts to about 4.5% for new community development districts and somewhat pioneering locations. I was surprised that even the very new ones, without a track record in this environment, are still seeing very warm receptions. And a part of that is because most of these community development districts are residential or have very large residential components to them. And the residential real estate markets are holding up surprisingly, amazingly well. In fact, for the master plan communities like Nono or the Villages or Baldwin Park, communities of that type, here in Florida, their sales for the first 6 months of this year are higher than they were for the first 6 months of 2019. I mean, I was so surprised, Trevor. I actually had to go back and look to see if I made a mistake. So a very two-track economy, as you point out. And so those people who have jobs, have income, mortgage rates are low, it's supporting these residential markets, which are then translating into demand for this CDD product. To your point about helping projects, community development district financing is for infrastructure primarily, anything horizontal primarily, but it's 100% financing, no equity, and it's 30-year fixed rate, off balance sheet, no guarantee. It is by far the cheapest capital in the capital stack for any project I've ever seen. Right now, the pass-through levels, that is the debt that does not have to be paid back, can be measured, if you will, quite conveniently using a millage rate type approach. So if you think about the city of Lake Nona or the town of the Villages, it has a millage rate equivalent on its assessments. So 2 to 3 mils can be passed through to the end users, which is another benefit of debt that never has to be paid back. About 25 cents per square foot on commercial is about all that can get passed through. The other main source of capital right now for projects is public-private partnerships with governments, which is also very active now as these governments try to develop or have some or spur some economic activity in a very depressed commercial marketplace. Trevor, back to you, sir.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that banks' debt coverage ratios will be maybe 60 or 65% max, and that the developers of projects need to come up with, 30% or so preferred equity and another 15% or so real equity. And it's a tough equation to solve. Saw this morning the federal debt numbers for this fiscal year, which are scary. talk about the federal debt, but please be brief. We don't have all afternoon.
I will be brief, and this is a descent into the dismal science, Trevor, so we'll do it with pictures. So right now, no one should be particularly concerned about the deficit or the federal debt. We need to be spending as much money at the federal level as we can to offset the incredible negative effects of this COVID-19 recession. And if we don't do that, and if we don't continue to do that until there's a vaccine, the economy will begin to fall back into recession. It's just as plain as it can be. This is not the time to be timid. This is the time to be bold and to spend what we need to support the economy, because there's going to be a vaccine. We're going to get over this, but we got to get from here to there without any more economic damage. And if anybody's concerned about the size of the deficit or the amount of the debt, which is a concern, but not in the short run. And the reason we know that is the 10-year bond rate is below 1%. People globally want to invest in our treasury debt. So as long as that's the case, at least in the short run, we don't need to worry. The long run is a big problem. And I'll just briefly show you. This is data from the Congressional Budget Office. In red, what we have is federal outlays as a percentage of GDP. In blue, we have federal revenues as a percentage of GDP. You can see that when we have recessions, 2008 or 9, or the COVID recession, you see a big spike in outlays, you see revenues go down, granted. But this has been going on since 1960. We've had Republicans and Democrats and presidents and, well, every mix. The problem is not political, the problem is not economic, the problem is structural. We have outlays that are running at 20% of GDP and revenues running at 17% of GDP for the last 40, 50 years. You don't need a PhD in economics or accounting to figure this out. There is no growth rate of GDP that closes this gap. And the reason we have the gap is because of our entitlements programs and the structure. Medicare, Medicaid, defense spending are the key large elements. We are going to need to reform and raise the age for full retirement benefits. We know we need to do it, we just don't. And until we do it, we're going to have this problem. But we will eventually find the right solution. But there's not enough of a crisis yet in Social Security, Trevor. But right now, we shouldn't be worried about it.
Fair enough. Let's shift our focus, please, to Florida's population. What do you see as the tally for in-migration numbers starting in 2016 and then this year and then going forward? It seems to me as though our low tax environment, our environment, our climate, and our multi-generational boomer appeal is very compelling. But at this time, foreign in-migration is at 0, and we have very, very high unemployment. So what factors do you think is being most prominent?
No, I think those are the right factors, Trevor. I think you're right on board. Let's start with a little bit of perspective. I think it's useful. Here's Florida population growth from 1971 through 2019. And what you can see is the population growth actually peaked in 2016. So even before this recession began, our population growth had already slowed to below average. And there's some good reasons for that. And as you correctly point out, Trevor, it's because we've had a sharp drop in international migration. Here's international migration in yellow. Here's domestic migration between states in red. And our population growth peaked here in 2016. Since then, we've had some slowing of domestic migration first, and then international migration. Now, why did domestic migration slow down for Florida? It's ironic, but it's not because of something that happened in Florida. We get most of our growth from states east of the Mississippi River. And so what happened was the economy in those states really improved in 17, 18, and 19. There were more jobs and income. And although retirees continued to move in, we got less labor force flow. And so therefore our population growth did slow down. We also got a boost in this area when we had all the influx from Puerto Rico after the hurricanes. And so of course that slowed down as well. But there's been a sharp drop. And then that said, we have some of the fastest growing metropolitan areas. Here's Orlando and Kissimmee at number 5, Tampa, St. Pete. So we've had strong rates of population growth. But looking forward now, this is a terrible recession. I mean, we know that we're going to have over 100,000 for job loss in Florida this year. We've already had slowing population growth in these blue bars. So population growth is going to slow again this year significantly, much as it did back in 2008 and 9 when we had this drop of employment. Now we're going to get this one. So population growth is going to slow, and it's going to be a climb out for Orlando to come back out of this recession. Even with a vaccine, we're still not going to get quite back up to these rates given the damage that was done because of the exposure we have to an economy that is so service sector oriented. And finally, there's significant variation in population growth, to return to that, Trevor, across the various counties of the MSA, and I'll just use a few of these. So here's Orange County, and you can see here's international migration, here's domestic migration, and you can see it slows sharply, and in fact, we had no domestic migration on net basis because people were moving from Orange County into the surrounding counties. Osceola County has a magnified effect on the international migration here in red because of that movement out of Puerto Rico into Osceola County, and then it stopped. And as you correctly point out, that slowed population growth. A different kind of mix in Seminole County, where there's much more domestic migration in yellow, in part coming out of Orange County into Seminole, just like we have population growth coming from Dade into Broward and Palm Beach. We have some of the same thing happening here in Central Florida and those differential trends, Trevor.
That's really interesting. Anecdotally, this week I heard that that Penske and U-Haul have, the comment was that the Northeast is emptying out. It seems to me that we're going to see a fair amount of in-migration from high-tax states and elsewhere into Florida going forward. We are in August 2020, and many of my friends and colleagues have heard me for well over 2 years predict that August 2020 would be my 5th economic correction here in Central Florida. I might have been a little tardy, and I certainly missed the severity because I thought it was going to be a buying opportunity at worst. But I also forecast that women in particular were going to be riled up, they're going to be running for office, they're going to be voting, and they're going to emerge. Hank, you got to notice that they outnumber us demographically. And so in 2021, I foresee a significantly higher level of female authority in the local, state, and federal levels. Now, when I called it the estrogen wave, I thoroughly pissed off about half the people that heard me say that. But the fact I picked up this week was that just among women of color, there are 267 of them running for federal U.S. Congress office right now. I have no idea what the other count is among women, but I want to know if such a wave hits at the governmental level, what kind of effects will we feel? To me, it sort of seems like a butter versus guns issue, that infrastructure, education, unemployment aid, and healthcare are in the equation at a time when our Defense Department budget is $285 billion and there's no declared wars. And perhaps we're spending a lot of money on 20th century armament. Do you foresee defense cuts? What other effects do you see, Hank?
Yeah, there's going to be major structural changes, Trevor. The points you make are part of that structural change. And part of it comes about when we've had dislocating economic events. We get major structural changes, oftentimes, not always, oftentimes. So it depends upon how you handicap the election. And I'm an economist, so I'm just going to share with you data. I'm not going to try to make any forecasts, but you know, it looks like right now that Biden is ahead in the polls on average. This is a set of simulations done by Nate Silver, 538, well respected, thinking that Biden is favored to win the election. It may also be that the Democrats could take control of Congress. The Republicans are defending 23 seats in the Senate. Democrats are defending 12. Democrats have much more seats in the House. So there is a good chance that there could be some major change, in addition to the wave of many more women coming into powerful positions. And those two things suggest that there's likely to be some significant changes. I think we're going to see major changes to healthcare. As a market economist, it is obvious to me that there is a major economic problem with our healthcare system. It has experienced market failure. Healthcare is just not the kind of good that is amenable to a free market economics. It's not like buying a car or buying a house or other things. So I do think we're going to see a move toward Medicare for all in some way. I think there'll be a private option, but I think it's going to wither over time. From a business perspective, it reduces costs and improves competitiveness. I mean, my second or third largest cost from year to year in my business is healthcare. So I think many businesses will be on board for that. But there's going to be higher taxes for sure. I think you'll see higher and more progressive taxes for businesses and households next year and the year after. And I think there'll be significant increases in federal spending with, to your point, Trevor, likely slowdown in defense spending and an expansion in social welfare spending, education, and training. I do think regardless of who wins or what happens with Congress, we're going to continue to move away from globalization. I think that is somewhat regrettable, but we have horribly mishandled the consequences for our fellow citizens. And despite the overall economic benefit that globalization may provide, it has not been managed in a way that it provided those benefits to enough people to have enough political support. And so regrettably, I think that's going to shift some. And I think there's going to be major increases in energy taxes or a carbon tax or both over the next few years. So back to you, Trevor.
Yeah, one of the healthcare phenomenon that I like to point out is Harris Rosen.
Yeah.
Rosen hotel chain has its own healthcare system of clinics and healthcare providers for his employees and his employees' families. And when I complimented him on that last time I saw him, he was very proud of the fact that he had just added 10,000 people to his system in Osceola County. He sees it as a real retention and employee recruitment tool because he's providing excellent service at much less cost than you get on the open market. But Hank, you and I have talked briefly about what a huge benefit to profitability would be if businesses were decoupled from the requirement to provide health care, because most businesses just despise that requirement, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it puts us at an international competitive disadvantage. And it's pretty clear that we're having market failure since we spend the most of any country and we don't have the best overall health outcomes, Trevor.
Right. Now we want to shift our focus to the office market. Many of us are involved there, both urban and suburban. This sector is undergoing profound changes. I think we are all aware. Our ability to work remotely is just more than just a game changer. And employers and entities that occupy office space as tenants can easily economize and reduce their footprint. And so many of them would like to sublet some of their space, but in a market that's slack, subletting rhymes with bloodletting, but it's underway, right now?
Yeah, and there's been major changes. And as was the case with the retail sector, this COVID-19 recession has accelerated trends that were already underway. And it has shortened that transition in a very disruptive fashion. Back between 1980 and 2000, we used to think about each office employee would require about 250 gross square feet of space, including the non-productive space. And then since 2000, that changed dramatically to be about 150 square feet or less. And now with this post-COVID, businesses understand that their employees can work from home, that there's need for office. There is a continuing need for collaboration, but it doesn't have to be every day, and it doesn't have to be in large office spaces. Those offices can be used in different ways, and given that office space is typically the third largest expense for most businesses, firms are absolutely going to economize on this as their leases come up. And so there's going to be tremendous pressure. And again, only the very best or the very cheapest are going to compete well over the next 5 years. And with more people working from home, offices that are located near higher valued residential areas are going to be the ones that are going to outcompete. If people are working from home and they're in Lake Nona, they want to have their office near Lake Nona or near Heathrow or other significant master plan communities that people really want to live in, or downtown locations where people want to be. So that's going to sort out. But just look at these data from Google. Even with some places reopening and allowed to reopen, we're 36% below baseline for mobility for workplaces. So it's already happened. And this isn't going to go back to zero. It's never going back to zero. And so these are permanent changes, Trevor. And so therefore, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for adaptive reuse for both retail and office space, because there's just going to be an ocean full of excess supply everywhere in the country, and certainly everywhere here in Central Florida.
Yeah, I find that in our business, real estate brokerage and management and appraisal, we are a collaborative firm, and it's a collaborative industry, and there is definitely, we work better together when we can interface face to face. But I also find that since my office is 10, 12, my house is 10 or 12 minutes from here, and you can begin work anytime you wish, and you can end work when anytime you wish. It is an enormous benefit for me to have a safe office to go to and a highly productive setup at home. So profound changes. That wasn't the way it used to be. Let's shift our gaze to the housing industry, which we could talk about all day. Again, it's such a complex equation, but will Metropolitan Orlando's valuations suffer like it did in the 2008-2009 vintage recession? And what new trends do you see out there, such as single family detached rental communities that people are talking to me about? And then the final question, I think we have a critical need for workforce and attainable housing supply, which is just totally undersupplied. Are there opportunities there? And the fact that this is August and it's such a gloomy month, is this the buy signal?
Yeah. First, in order to put some perspective on it, let's go back to the forecast for a minute so we can see kind of what the big numbers are. Population growth is certainly going to slow this year, which is going to reduce the overall demand for housing or for new housing. But I do see, some improvement going forward as the economy begins to recover. And those places, as I said, the master plan communities are already outperforming. But the Orlando area is underperforming right now for both new and existing housing because of this dramatic impact on our economy. That said, I don't think there's much risk that we're going to see a big fall off in valuations. The 2007-8-9 disaster in housing occurred because of a huge excess supply of housing. It was a classic goods recession. This is a service sector recession. There is no excess inventory overhang in the housing markets. In fact, if anything, there's no inventory in the existing market. There's no inventory in the new market. And so we don't have that overhang that would depress pricing. Markets remain tight, even though closed sales for both existing single-family homes were down 5% year over year, townhouse condo down 10%, the pending sales are up. So those markets have begun to stabilize on the existing side, but we do have a huge affordability problem. We've had it for a long time. It's a function of our service sector type economy. It's incredibly exacerbated when there aren't any service sector jobs, and we still have huge populations. So this is just going to be a terrible, difficult situation economically for many, many families. But in terms of affordable housing, there is an opportunity. With the excess supply of obsolete retail and obsolete office space, there is a huge opportunity to repurpose those that are in the best locations that can be repurposed for residential uses, because they sure as heck don't have much utility as retail or office uses. And it's going to take some change to spur that. You know, Trevor, as we've all seen, it takes owners a long time to come to grips with reality, especially reality they don't like. And so it's hard to see the repricing happen right away. But some additional government policies to allow for density and to get rid of some of the impact fees and connection charges and other things that could change the calculus and make it more economic, that would go a long way to helping with affordability and helping to absorb and repurpose some of this excess space that we're going to see in the retail and office sectors. So back to you, Trevor.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. One of my clients talks about it, that repurposing as recycling asphalt, where you would turn a parking lot and out-of-date building into new housing. We're now going to talk about industrial and distribution businesses. You're so active right now. Buildings with solid leases are just a solid investment magnet today. We see cash and investment funds available and really wanting to be in this market. The market seems rather stable in terms of industrial supply and demand, but we may be on the verge of overbuilding due to the exuberance. I know that Amazon recently backfilled the Winn-Dixie facility in the Center of Commerce, which is 1 million square feet of vacant industrial space. And they're also talking with J.C. Penney about occupying some vacant big box retail. And we're also seeing a number of prospects for cold storage, food-related warehousing, and third-party logistics here. They're all active. So, Hank, what are you seeing?
No, I think all of that is correct. I think those are the strongest non-residential components. I think they'll continue to do well over the next few years, despite the dislocation on the services side. There is a great structural change to deliver groceries and other things in different ways, and that will continue to support the demand for warehouse distribution type space. I think that is part and parcel of the structural changes that have occurred in retail and will continue to accelerate, Trevor. So I think those sectors will remain relative bright spots on our non-residential side.
Great. Okay, these next questions are more along the line of rapid fire. The defense industry, the simulation industry, and Space Force are huge employers, stable employers here. Please discuss the significance of those.
They're very significant, and they're doing very well. And in an environment where there is the desire to both save money and be more cost effective, I think you're going to see, and I think we're seeing, an expansion of those military simulation type training and facilities. And certainly we're seeing a boom going on at the Space Coast with increased launches and reusable vehicles and some significant spillover onto the manufacturing side. So all of that has been very strong. I think all of that continues. Trevor, back to you.
Yeah, I also observed Defense Dividend last year, which was a NAIOP event that occurred out at Luminar. They for years have been doing LiDAR for our troops on the defense side, but they're now adapting that technology to autonomous vehicle control. And that was just an amazing, really wide-eye-opening for me as to how effective that defense-driven research and development can help us domestically. With regard to employment, Hank, what is your projection for Metropolitan Orlando's unemployment rate at the end of this year and into 2021?
Yeah, the unemployment rates are going to remain elevated until we have a vaccine, Trevor. It's particularly difficult for communities where the economies like Las Vegas and ours are so heavily service dependent. The initial read on the June and July reopenings of the parks were very disappointing. Didn't even meet their own expectations. There's going to be additional rounds of layoffs. The other high frequency data, TSA reports at the airports, not encouraging. So our unemployment rate in this metropolitan area is close to 20%. It's 25% in Osceola County. That just doesn't get much better. And these are depression level kind of numbers. We will start to see some benefit, but clearly given the timing for a vaccine, we're going to miss the winter season. So this is going to be not really much recovery until we get to the summer season of 2021, assuming we have a vaccine by December, January. So not much good to say, Trevor.
Seatbelts fastened, everybody.
Yeah.
Shifting our focus to transportation, I noted that the sales tax initiative in Orange County, which was going to add a penny for dedicated funding source for Lynx and for Sunrail, that of course was suspended earlier this year due to the pandemic effect. And you know, I see I-4 Ultimate, those folks, SGL is supposed to repair all the roads that they've been beating the crap out of with their trucks and their shipments of beams and that sort of thing. We just don't have any funding to improve our roads and in particular do anything with regard to transit. What do you forecast?
I don't see that changing in the near term given the really difficult economic conditions. Local government's going to be struggling just to backfill their budgets as best they can. There's tremendous, obviously tremendous dislocation in terms of the funding for the airport and the convention center and other things that really are going to require government to focus on those things. So not much happens with transportation in the short run. Technology may ultimately change this dramatically as we move towards more self-driving vehicles. But between then and now, we're going to face not much additional funding. But with work from home, there may be less demand on the roadway systems and ironically less congestion. So we may be okay. I think something important to watch is what happens with Brightline. That rail is potentially a major game changer. They are continuing to build the track. They do expect to open up through Miami, West Palm Beach to Orlando in the next few years. There's strong talk about them trying to expand to Tampa. Those kind of things would be major change. They also want to consider connecting the Sunrail system to the airport. I mean, if we could knit all that together, it would really make a big difference. But none of that's going to happen in the short run as we try to get past this recession, Trevor.
Yeah, and I noticed that Brightline is no longer a Virgin.
Right.
Sorry, a Virgin train, a Virgin driven. They coupled it from Branson's company. Here's a question from one of the attendees here. Hank, in your view, should Orange County be investing in expansion of the Orange County Convention Center anytime soon? If we can conservatively estimate that the convention-related tourism is unlikely to recover for this foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think, we're going to get a vaccine. I think there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand for leisure travel, but it takes a long time for business travel to rebuild. And so we eventually will want to expand that convention center. We need to keep it at the forefront of competitiveness, but timing obviously is appropriately delayed.
All right. Shifting our focus to broadband and interconnectivity, bandwidth. Having sufficient bandwidth is absolutely crucial for working and learning from home or in any remote location. And I know that the rural areas really suffer from lack of good broadband connections. Any comments on that?
Yeah, no, it's a real issue. It's a real issue also for even where there's availability, We have affordability issues in our community. Again, because of the structure of our economy. We have a large volume of lower paid service workers. We need to have standards and investment to assure that everyone has access. And we're going to have to do something, not just about broadband, but actually about the tablets and the computers, because we'll have more distance learning, more work from home. So these things become increasingly important, and some investment and some change in regulation both would go a long way to assuring that where there is connectivity, people can connect, because that's as much of a problem as the rural areas right now, Trevor.
Interesting. Climate, I want to talk about climate. Here in Central Florida, we are an inland location on a peninsula, and I think our climate is, our subclimate is correctly described and accurately described as a bicoastal subtropical rainforest. It seems pretty ideal, or pretty favorable, and we've got an immense freshwater resource in the Florida aquifer, which, by the way, we are tapping to the max right now. But my question is, are institutional investors and lenders taking into account climate when they're making their locational decisions as to where to deploy capital?
Yeah, they're just starting. We're just starting to see it, and I'll give you some good concrete examples. The rating agencies and BlackRock are now insisting that when we provide to them offering statements concerning long-term 30-year bonds, that we address climate issues. So it's already here now. We're starting to see major changes in South Florida. It's beyond nuisance flooding. Every single month at high tide, for at least 2 days, Lincoln Road floods. That's one of the most exclusive retail areas in Miami Beach. Who the heck is going to go there when the water's over your ankles for 2 days every month? There's flooding in Key Largo now, every single month. The nuisance flooding, quote unquote, has gotten so bad that last year, people in Miami-Dade County voted $200 million of property taxes on themselves to begin to deal with flooding. People in Miami Beach last year voted over $100 million of additional property taxes on themselves to raise some of the roadways. So, when people start to do that, you know it's a real problem, Trevor. And I think it's only a matter of time till insurance companies and banks say to themselves, hey, maybe we don't want to issue a 30-year fixed rate mortgage on a $2 million condominium sitting on the beach in Miami. 30 years. So when this begins to happen, regrettably, it never happens at a nice, even pace. It is going to be very disruptive when some of the insurance companies and some of the banks all of a sudden go, oh, time out. Because when that happens, there also is a resulting revaluation with dramatic effects on wealth and cascading effects on governments because they rely on property taxes. So this is a reality that's going to be perhaps the next crisis once we get past this COVID-19, Trevor.
Yeah, I know when my son and I were up in Charleston, South Carolina last year at this time, I noticed water coming out of the storm sewer inlet grates, and had I tasted it, it would have been salty. And it was, there was no rain. It wasn't a particularly special event, but what's our Florida economy recovery going to look like, do you think, compared with the national economy? And are there submarkets here that are going to fare better than others in terms of pace and breadth of the recovery?
Yeah. At least until there's a vaccine, we're going to underperform significantly. Once there's a vaccine and we get past that, so let's say we have a vaccine in January of 2021 to make up a number, I think there's a lot of pent-up demand. So I think the second half of 2021 and particularly 2022, we will outperform, especially here in Central Florida, but across Florida more generally because of the effects on our tourism and travel and our retirement businesses. But between then and now, almost no place is going to perform that well. Right now, the places with a somewhat lower tourism service load are doing somewhat better, but nobody's doing great. So Jacksonville's doing a little better. Tampa, St. Pete doing a little better. Orlando doing the worst. South Florida somewhere in between. Panhandle's quite depressed as well right now, Trevor, and it's never really recovered fully from the 2008, 2009 recession. So some areas there, especially Panama City, not recovering from the hurricane, it was really depressed.
I want to shift focus now to bankruptcies, and in a humorous way, I want to point out that many of the viewers here are probably sitting around in drawstring pants rather than belts and ties and dresses and skirts. Brooks Brothers and Lord & Taylor, two of the oldest dry goods retailers in this country, founded in the early 1800s, are both in Chapter 11 right now. The fashion industry is just in horrible shape. So what will the business bankruptcy picture look like here over this year, the remainder of this year and next?
Yeah, it's going to be really ugly. Not only will there be bankruptcies of larger firms and chains that are in retail, restaurant, or hospitality, it's going to be a big problem for a lot of hotels. We're going to see major dislocation in the hotel industry and a repricing. And then it's just going to be a huge problem for small businesses, restaurants, and retail in particular on the small side. So I don't see anything good coming of this. And the people just, and the hotels just run out of cash after a while. Where hotel occupancies are running 30%. It's not sustainable.
You know, I agree with that. And yet, when I started in the business in '75, my dad and Harris Rosen and some of my dad's clients were able to buy hotels for essentially zero cash, a reduced mortgage, and the lenders would put up the money to pay the back taxes and power bills that were owed. And that's when Harris got his whole start. And for me as a land guy, I was able to show up during the Disneyland bust when all these investors had been stuck with land in the Orlando area. And I had just the right calling card working with Florida Ranch Lands. It's a real opportunity for me. So I think in this era of bankruptcies and perceived foreclosures and that sort of thing, there are opportunities for our membership if you're working on the right transactions.
Now, to your point, there's tremendous opportunities. The biggest fortunes are often made, regrettably, at the bottom of the cycle when assets reprice, to your point, Trevor. And the hotel industry certainly is one of those sectors locally that's going to see, regrettably, a lot of that.
With regard to governmental funding, the state and the local level, especially with education, are really challenged right now and stressed. Will there be tax increases? What do you see around the corner there?
I don't see tax increases in our state. Perhaps if the legislature could be a little more rational, we might be among the states that taxes internet sales. There's only 2 states that don't tax internet sales, Florida and Missouri. I mean, even Mississippi and Louisiana. So perhaps when the legislature comes back in session, that's $1 billion. That would really make a big difference. But I don't see much other thrust to raise taxes at the state or local levels. Perhaps we will see some attempts at reform. Our sales tax system at the state level is a patchwork of exemptions and reductions and other crazy things that have accumulated over time. But there's a great reluctance at the state level to really address that, and certainly a great reluctance to raise taxes in the face of a great recession, regardless of the need for state and local services, Trevor. So I don't see tax increases on the horizon.
2 anecdotes. One, I really am proud of NAIOP's efforts for helping to reduce the sales tax on commercial real estate rentals. Not too long ago, I had the opportunity to talk with our former Orlando Mayor, Bill Frederick, and I was complaining. I said, you know, Bill, when you show up in Tallahassee, unless you have a briefcase full of $10,000 bills and are working, you know, with the Committee of Continuing Existence or something like that, you're just a damn constituent. And he said, Trevor, that's the way it's always been. kind of interesting. But
Yeah.
To close, this has been a really interesting hour for me and for, I hope, for everybody on the line here. Our NAIOP membership includes entrepreneurs, service providing professionals, investors, bankers, developers, and many others. We're all going to make countless decisions this year and next. And it is hoped that the content that we've shared here will help guide all y'all, and that is proper Southern English. It'll help guide all y'all to make good choices and avoid ill-advised investments and career moves. There is a ton of noise out there, and I hope we've given you some strong signals. With that said, where do you, Hank, to be some of the greatest opportunities for investment and employment in this climate?
Well, there's going to be huge investment opportunities for those with capital, Trevor. Certainly in the hotel area and to repurpose retail and office product is going to be tremendous opportunity. I think that the economy will come back very strongly once there is that vaccine. So we just have to get across this sort of the valley of death here to the promised land.
Excellent. And finally, in tribute to Regis Philbin, please give me your final answer as to how in the future, when we look back with 2020 hindsight, how will we characterize and talk about and view the inevitable year 2020?
I think we'll see it as one of the worst economic years in our area, but one that we got through.
And my term is disruptor cubed, to the third power. It just seems like there is an aspect of our lives and our business activities that hasn't been disrupted by the virus and the pandemic effect that we've been through here. Well, Hank, I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you on this. I think it's been a real enjoyable time for all of us, and that's all I have. Be well, everyone. For those who are still on, I do want to again thank our sponsors, HBFC, the banker, and Colliers. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye-bye, Trevor.